go do is it's almost 6:27, so I have to get people to come inside. But send it to me one more time. You're at the end, so it's okay, we have some time. All right, so hello. Can you hear me? Okay, so we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. If everyone who's standing near the back, if you can take a seat, that would be greatly appreciated. Wait, I was, but it's dead now.
Yep, you killed Spotify.
Quit. We're good to go.
Bitcoin.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Wow, this is quite a few people. This is impressive. So we started our first meetup in January of this year, and I think we had 3 people or 4 people. This is a nice growth of that. Okay, so I'm going to get started really quickly. My name is Sunny. I'm founder of a company called UnoCoin. UnoCoin is India's leading Bitcoin company. I don't know if any of you have heard of what happened in India over the last week. Alwyn, he's doing this. Right. So anyway, so the government decided to denominate all 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee currencies in the country. So everything it says 500 rupees is about $10 and 1,000 rupees is about 20 Canadian dollars. And so the government just said that they're no longer money and people have to come and change it for new money at the bank. So anyways, that's caused a lot of interest in Bitcoin. But I'm going to spare you guys the background info. I'm going to actually start with a 1-minute video. The video is titled, most of you have probably seen this, but the title of the video is What is Bitcoin? And then we're going to jump into our speaker series. All right.
What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower. You can use them in every country. Your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Several currency exchanges exist where you can buy and sell Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Your Bitcoins are kept in your digital wallet on your computer or mobile device. Sending Bitcoins is as simple as sending an email, and you can purchase anything with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin network is secured by individuals called miners. Miners are rewarded newly generated Bitcoins for verifying transactions. After transactions are verified, they are recorded in a transparent public ledger. Bitcoin opens up a whole new platform for innovation. The software is completely open source and anyone can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Bitcoins are a great way for businesses to minimize transaction fees. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them, and it's easy to set up. There are no chargebacks, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For more information about Bitcoin, visit weusecoins.com.
All right. Okay. So before I begin, I want to also take another stab at trying to explain Bitcoin. And many of you have probably heard me say this, so I apologize. But for those of you who haven't, and I know just by show of hands, how many people are here for the first time, like at a Bitcoin or blockchain? Wow, that's quite a few. Okay. So okay, I get the fact that this stuff is kind of complicated and it's very confusing. So I'm going to take a stab at explaining it. So Bitcoin is essentially the world's first open source, decentralized digital currency and payment network. The reason most people find it confusing is because it's 2 things in one. It's both a digital currency, kind of like dollars or gold. When I first heard about Bitcoin 4 years ago or 5 years ago, each Bitcoin was worth about $10. Today, each Bitcoin is worth close to $1,000. So it essentially goes up in value. However, it is highly volatile, so we don't recommend anyone put more than they can afford to lose into something like this. And the second aspect is that it's also a payment rail, kind of like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal. It's rails for moving value from one person to another or one entity to another. And the real remarkable thing about all of this is that it's open source. Open source means that anybody who understands a little bit of code can review it and verify that it is what it is. And it's distributed, meaning there's no central point of failure. There's no government or company or person. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. It's kind of like a protocol like SMTP or HTTP. So with that said, I'm going to jump into, before we get into our speaker series, I have one person who wants to share a quick message. So the Ontario Securities Commission is doing a hackathon 2 weeks from now on the 25th. And so Kassan from Nuco is going to talk a few words about that.
Hey everyone, my name is Kesem. I'm the CEO of a company called Nuco. Nuco is essentially a blockchain company that really thinks of the underpinning that make that make Bitcoin possible, but try to abstract it and try to imagine what kind of use cases, what kind of functionality and services are possible when we're all taking distributed ledger technology in a much more serious, in a much more significant way. As Sunny said, and thank you for that, we are going to be a technical partner for the OSC for a hackathon happening next Friday. Essentially, it's a hackathon where the regulators, the Ontario Securities Commission, is very seriously looking at this domain of FinTech and trying to understand how is regulation affected by the ability to do things faster, more streamlined, in a more agile way. So it tends to be stuff that we usually are bored by, right? It's regulation, it's auditing, it's compliance, really boring stuff. But I would argue that you should definitely take it seriously, because it's our opportunity to essentially go to the regulator and really try to make a dent in how systems that affect all our lives are operated. So Google RegHack TO, that stands for Regulation Hackathon Toronto. The deadline for registrations for teams is the 23rd, so just 2 days before the hackathon, and we are actually kicking off on Friday Eve, the 25th of November. My team and myself will be there all weekend. We're going to support anyone who wants to do something on a blockchain. So we're going to help coders actually get going fast, and I hope we get many teams out of it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so for our first speaker, we have an award-winning coder who then became a lawyer. His name is Addison, and without any further ado, I'd like you to help me welcome Addison.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. How many people here work for startups? It's maybe half the room. How many people here are developers? Also about half the room. Okay, so my presentation is going to be about some of the legal risks involved in creating software that works with blockchains. So it's particularly aimed at the startup developer crowd that's here. If you work for a very large company, probably someone will take care of some of these things for you. If you're doing a startup that has something to do with blockchains, the #1 issue is IP ownership. Who owns what? You need to make sure that you own all of the code that's going into your company's product. And if you don't own it, you need to understand why you don't own it and what the restrictions are that are on it. So what are the components that are going into your project? What are the libraries that you're incorporating? How do all these pieces fit together? Do the libraries that you're bringing into it, do those affect the commercial opportunities for what you're planning on doing? What are you planning on doing with your blockchain software? Who are you planning on selling this thing to? And do you need to do something different? Maybe there's a library that has terms that are going to negatively impact your project, and from the beginning, you're going to need to do something different other than including that library. And a lot of blockchain projects are open source. So if you're planning on open sourcing your project, you're probably going to run into some issues around owning your product. So when you're open sourcing something, that means you're probably going to be working with other people. You're going to be accepting other people's code into your project, and on what terms will you be incorporating that code into your project, and do you have the necessary rights? And if someone were to come along later and say, do you actually own all of the pieces that are here? Or do you own the code that you're dual licensing? So maybe you're licensing open source, free to use for some people, and you're licensing commercial to other people. Do you have all of the necessary rights? And when you're first starting off, you're prototyping things. It probably doesn't particularly matter what libraries you're using or what you're doing. But hopefully, you're trying to either raise a bunch of money or convince other people to join your project. And at that point, you're probably going to need to seriously look at what the pieces are. And it's a lot better if from the get-go, you've already looked at these components and made sure that everything is in order and that you can do what you want to do with the code you have. And if you're open sourcing code, you might want to think about trademark issues as well. And normally this isn't something that comes up, but in the open source world of blockchain, there's a lot of copying. There's a lot of people grabbing code off of wherever, repackaging it as a different product, and distributing that. And will that affect you? So you call your project Xcoin, and somebody else copies the Xcoin open source software, and they release the Xcoin app on the App Store that's affecting your brand. Are they allowed to do that? Are they not? Should you have trademarked it before? Think about your distribution strategy. If you're giving people access to the code, what happens if they don't use it the way you want them to use it? What are the terms? And how are you planning for this eventual future that will probably happen? Many blockchain products have had to deal with knockoffs of the product being distributed on app stores or distributed elsewhere. And it's good to make sure that you understand what the rights picture looks like there. Other people's money. Again, if it's just you starting your own project, maybe it doesn't really matter. But when you're involving other people's money, that's when suddenly there's a whole bunch of legal things that are probably going to come into play. And it really depends whose money it is, what you're doing with the money. Are you doing an ICO, an initial coin offering? Are you pre-selling a coin that you plan to create? Are you pre-selling some other software product that you will be creating? Is that where your money is coming from? Is your money coming from traditional funding, angel investors, something else like that? Depending on where your money is coming from, you may need to do different things legally with your business, and you also need to worry about different issues of what's going to happen to those other people's money, especially if you're doing any kind of crowdfunding thing. So if you have traditional funders who are being involved in your business, some sort of angel investor, venture capitalist, their lawyers are going to watch out for their interests, and things will go along fairly smoothly with the paperwork, depending on what you're doing there. But there's a lot of innovative ways of making money in blockchain that will be used for creating the projects. And this is where you can run into interesting problems. I encourage everyone to Google the DAO and see how that one went. I'm getting some laughs here. And this is really interesting because if I make a smart contract that just displays some message or something that runs on the Ethereum network, there's really not a lot of risk there. There's not really a problem. But in the DAO, what they did was to raise many tens of millions of dollars for their smart contract, and then it was hacked, the money was gone. You can read about this very interesting saga, and then you've got a whole bunch of problems. So depending on what your blockchain software product is, you should give different consideration to what will happen with it. If you're handling millions of dollars of other people's money in the form of digital tokens or something else along those lines, you should probably be thinking a lot more about these legal issues than if you're developing some sort of back-end library that's going to be used for analytics or some other purpose like that. Think about what you're building and what could happen if it goes wrong. What happens if there's a bug in your smart contract that you're releasing onto a blockchain? What happens if there's bugs in the product that you're releasing and other people are using? If you're making wallet software, what happens if there's a problem in the generation of people's wallets and then tomorrow 5,000 people open up their wallet and they can no longer access any of their digital tokens. One of the things that's going to happen is many people are going to come asking you about what happened to all of their tokens and asking you to somehow compensate them or somehow fix this mistake. So think about the magnitude of what you're doing. What could go wrong if your product is successful? Because that was part of the problem with the DAO. I mean, you can read different opinions on this, but I don't think anybody anticipated they would get that much money. But consider that your project might be a really big success, and a lot of people might put a lot of faith in your product, and there could be serious consequences if something goes wrong. Lots of places you can learn more. There's lots of industry news, things like CoinDesk, subreddits. Follow along with these projects. Even if the legal information isn't very good, lots of them are interesting examples of what could go wrong or what could go right with your project, and you should think about those legal risks and discuss those with your lawyers. You can see a little bit of the bullet points that I've prepared of some issues that people should be looking at when they're making blockchain software, when you're getting your company first off the ground. You can look at me on Twitter, and you can download these slides. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Addison. Okay, so for our next speaker, we have Anastasia, and so she was working on a project called CryptoMed. They were also the winner of a blockchain hackathon that was held by Blockchain Canada, and she's also now currently working with Ledger Labs. So help me welcome Anastasia. Just give me 1 second. Can you open it yours?
Hello, my name is Anastasia. I'm a co-founder of a project called CryptoMed, and unfortunately I do not have my slides with me, which are a very powerful image of a story I'm about to tell. So we all hear about Bitcoin and Ethereum, usually in the context of money or fintech companies, and rarely do we hear the stories of how those truly powerful technologies could change a lot of the aspects of our everyday lives. So today I'm going to touch on a topic that affects every single person in this room, our healthcare. And I wish I had my slides, but I had this giant picture of my medical records. And I just want you all to picture it. It's like a little booklet with pages falling out of it from the Soviet times. And half of the page is written in Romanian, which is a Latin language. Half of the page is written in Cyrillic, which is Russian, which is Cyrillic. And half of it is not even clear what language it is in because it's a lot of scribbles. Here's the kicker. There's only one copy of my entire medical history in the world, and that's this tiny booklet that's falling apart. And this is not just a problem of poor countries like my home country, Moldova, which is a tiny dot in Eastern Europe. This is also a problem in some of the most developed countries like Canada. Let me tell you what I mean. Let's imagine we're all going to go to a field trip to Halifax in Nova Scotia. And as residents of Ontario, we're going to walk into a pharmacy or a doctor and ask for a prescription drug. Guess what? It's going to take us a week because they don't have access to your medical records. The way the system works is, even though in Canada a lot of the records are electronic and we invest like billions of dollars, Congress in the United States invested $30 billion to get the medical records to be electronic. But they are stored in every single hospital's database. The information is entirely centralized, and hospitals rarely communicate with one another. They do create certain pathways, but usually they communicate through fax. And guess what? Fax is not very secure for very personal information. In fact, there has been a large number of hacks. I believe there's a famous scandal called Athens, where over 80 million worth of medical records were stolen. And it's not just a problem of security. We know from numerous of studies that repeat again and again that poor communication is the #1 reason of preventable preventable deaths. People die because they cannot access the medical records on time. Like, it's a really big problem. So you all ask me, for sure there's something that has been done about it. I mean, come on. And there has been. Ontario has invested almost over $1 billion in e-health programs designed to bridge those divides. There is an organization called InfoWay. But unfortunately, if you read the newspapers, you read the results, there's really little that can be shown as progress. A lot of the projects are scrapped before they're even born. There is too much bureaucracy. Things are happening too slowly. So a team of people, including me, Bill, Barry, and Akira, decided, how do we solve this problem? We know that Canadians are ready for this because an organization called MyHealth, that's actually in this building, conducted a study that shows that 95% of Canadians want to have control of their medical records. So we're ready for this. How do we solve this problem? And we designed a prototype that we call CryptoMed that turned into our little big project that won the Blockchain Canada hackathon this summer. And the idea behind CryptoMed is very simple. Why don't you go to your doctor? You ask them to write a simple form, and then you store it on a decentralized cloud called IPFS that's going to generate you as a patient a QR code, which is like a barcode. You know, those you scan in the store, like beep, beep. And then you put it on your bracelet, you can put it on your phone, you can put it wherever you want. And then the QR code gives you an access to a web page that can be accessed from anywhere in the world where there is internet, and that will open up a page where that will be encrypted. So your information is secure, but it allows you to enter a password, or gives you contact information that will enable you to open up your medical records and access them. And this is the project that we have developed, and a lot of people came up to us and were like, well, you know, there is a simple solution to the problem you're trying to solve. Why don't you just put everything on the cloud? You know, and then there are a lot of systems that can record whether a medical record has been edited or not. Why use a blockchain? And today I have a really strong argument of why I believe blockchain is ultimately the best solution. And I have 3 points. First of all, it is the most cryptographically secure solutions are the most secure that we know of. They're way more secure than fax and probably more secure than cloud, just simple cloud. Secondly, we eliminate the problem of a single point of failure. If you store everything on a single cloud, you are counting on the fact that this is in a particular server, and then if it's not accessible by whatever company you're trusting, like for example, Google Cloud, you have to trust Google, then you're screwed. But what we did is we can create an incentive mechanism in which we make it profitable for a lot of people to store pieces of your medical records that are encrypted. So they can't access it, but they're storing on their computer. Because whenever you use them, they get compensated for that. We can create the system. And my third point, which I believe is the most important one, is accountability. So you see, medical records, like a lot of records, like health drivers, IDs, they're very nuanced documents. There are like enormous rule books about how you're allowed to use them. For example, who is allowed to access them, consent, a lot of issues around them, how there should be moved around. And blockchain is incredibly amazing at solving those really difficult problems. So you see, humans are really bad at this. We create a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of bureaucracy, but blockchain creates a secure and mathematically cheap and valid way of just solving those governance problems. Because in a sense, blockchain is something that just reinforces rules. And we can code all those complicated rules and easily solve them. So this project is open to the community, and we believe it's something that's very important, that if together we bring it into its conclusion and develop all of its components together, make it work, we can create something that would benefit every single one of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia. Okay, so for our next speaker, we have Mariam Humayun, and she's going to be speaking. She's doing her PhD at the Schulich School of Business, and she's going to be speaking about the resilience of decentralized brands, Bitcoin. So help me welcome Mariam.
It works. I'm pretty small, so I wouldn't stand behind the podium, I guess. I'm Mariam Humayun, a PhD student at Schulich, a fourth-year PhD student, and I have been studying Bitcoin since 2014, and I'm in the marketing department, so you might be wondering, why the hell am I studying Bitcoin at all? I'm thinking about Bitcoin as a decentralized brand. When I say decentralized brand, what I mean is, when you think about every brand that you have in your life, you know, people wear brands. You wear clothes that are branded. You wear your Apple laptop. You wear those Bose earphones. With Bitcoin, it turns marketing on its head. Because what happens is, you have basically created this brand by the public, for the public, that actually ends up being shaped and controlled by a very diverse public. And there's a lot of sociological, a lot of ideological motivations that put it together. The thing that interests me, basically, from my research is, how do these decentralized brands become resilient or not? Now, how many of you knew Bitcoin through Silk Road? Quite a few. That was often the first encounter that you had with Bitcoin. The first encounter, which is basically an online drugs market. Now, one of the misconceptions is that Bitcoin is related to Silk Road. It wasn't. This was an external event. It was an online drugs market that came about that used Bitcoin as a currency. But it was not something that was great for Bitcoin. It associated Bitcoin with this, criminal, illegal image. The second crisis, and this was basically shut down by the FBI, and unfortunately Ross Ulbricht is in prison for life. The second crisis that took hold of the Bitcoin ecosystem was Mt. Gox. And we often tend to forget our history. We often focus on the positives of how great Bitcoin is. But when you think about it, Mt. Gox was a huge disaster in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Again, this was something that went against the principles of Bitcoin, because this was a centralized company that had a lot of people's money. And so what happened when Mt. Gox came about is that people were left asking questions like, who do we blame for this? Who do we hold responsible for how much of our money is gone? And there would be people who would come to meetups in 2014, and they would stand up and ask questions like, do you know what's going on? Am I going to get my money back? But nobody really had the answers. So this was not something that was great for the Bitcoin ecosystem. Another thing that keeps on happening in the Bitcoin ecosystem are the governance issues that Bitcoin faces. Right now, there are lots of schism in the community about how Bitcoin might scale or might not scale. So there's lots of tensions in the community right now that also work as destabilizing forces. And then you have the constant Satoshi Nakamoto identity crises. When you think about it, Satoshi Nakamoto was a guy or woman or he, she, it, they. We don't know who it is until now. All we know is that it was some Japanese pseudonym that's out on the internet. Now you could think about whenever Satoshi comes and somebody has their 15 minutes of fame saying, oh, Satoshi's been discovered, it destabilizes the entire ecosystem. The price fluctuates because we don't really know who Satoshi is. And if he comes out, people are in trouble, because what happens is once Satoshi comes out, you have this idea of a person being associated with Bitcoin. And then the person's personality, their life choices, all of those affect how we think about Bitcoin. And so a lot of people that I talk to, they often say, you know what, Satoshi, whoever you are, thank you so much. I would love to take you out for dinner, but please stay anonymous. But there's this idea that it will really affect and change Bitcoin if it came out. Now, there's also a lot of speculation that it was a CIA invention, Bitcoin. Because what happens is you have a blockchain that documents every single transaction that goes on. So what else would the CIA want better than that? So there are lots of conspiracy theories. Now, one of the things that you have to think about, and what Satoshi, or even think about this Michelangelo piece, which graces the Sistine Chapel, he probably didn't think that one day someone would vandalize the image by putting QR codes on it. There's a Bitcoin QR. That's Photoshop. It hasn't been ruined. But one of the things that about anything that you end up making in your life, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a child, whether it's a city or a nation, you hope that it would be resilient. You hope that it would survive, that it would remain once you're gone. And maybe Satoshi also hoped for that. He hoped for resilience in Bitcoin, that it would survive. Now, one of the things that was interesting when I started researching Bitcoin is how it kept on dying. Even my supervisor was like, are you sure you want to do this? Because this thing keeps on dying every other time. And that's one of the things that is very common. Bitcoin has had more than 106 obituaries. So it is a bit like that Latin soap opera star who keeps on coming back from the dead, refuses to die. And think about the fact that now thinking that Bitcoin is dead is like a way of identifying whether you're new to the community or not, When you think about memes, they're like the morality police of the internet. An anthropologist says that. So, this idea that if you think Bitcoin is dead, you must be new to the community. Think about the fact that today it's worth $743 US. And think about the fact that in 2009, when it started out, it was worth $0. And just consider the fact that it was two individuals, Satoshi and Hal Finney, who started out Bitcoin, who started out this idea that, we're going to start mining Bitcoins. It was basically computer code. That's worth something right now. And think about the fact that as of July, 200,000 Bitcoin transactions take place every single day. So what I'm doing in my research is I am basically studying consumer culture. And what I do is I interview a lot of people. I come to meetup events. I do participant observations, so I observe people. And I also know some of you through my work. And I am focusing on different cities. So it's not just Toronto. I'm doing interviews in different, people around the world, because that's one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin. It is decentralized. It's not located in one city or one place. Some of the preliminary findings, which are interesting, and I would love your feedback on all of these. One of them is the idea of altruism and gift-giving. This idea that people think of Satoshi Nakamoto as this prophet, modern-day prophet, as somebody who gave the world Bitcoin and then disappeared. Think about the street artist Banksy, who puts up street art around the world, and then he disappears. He doesn't take credit for what he made. And that's something that's really fascinating for people in the developers community, in the open source community, because what they like is people who do good work and then don't take credit for it. So there's an idea of merit in the hacker culture that that is interesting for Bitcoin. There's also the idea of myth. Think about Satoshi. His anonymity is fantastic, because what happens is if you have one person out there who's trying to take credit for something, it's hard to unite different people. Right now, Bitcoin could be a libertarian utopia. It could be a left-wing dream. It could be anything, but we don't know what it is. So with myth, what happens is it resolves their contradictions. And so that's one of the things that is interesting for Bitcoin. It's an identity marker as well. You also have the fact that there is no Bitcoin office, so it's decentralized, so there is no one single point of failure. And also, some of the other things which make it interesting is that there is rebirth, there is different growth. And there's also the marriage of bourgeoisie and rebel values. You have the hero myth, you have the bourgeoisie myth. And so it also welcomes a lot of different people, despite racial boundaries, ethnic, religious boundaries. So there was also this idea of act first and identify later. So you connect with people, and then you identify them with much later on. And that's pretty much it for me, and I would love to hear from you if you have any feedback. And yeah, so those are my contact details. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so some of you might be a little confused still. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this topic is fairly complicated, and to try and explain what Bitcoin and blockchain is in like an hour is trying to explain how like a combustion engine or how the internet works is not possible. So the intent of today is just to kind of get speakers up here that are doing exciting things in the space, give you a little high overview in terms of some of the areas that we think are fascinating, and then really it's up to you to go home and Google some of these things and learn about it, or contact us to learn more. Okay, so for our next speaker, just give me 1 second here. So one of the most remarkable things about Bitcoin is that so there was essentially this computer science problem that was solved, and it had to do something with people on other sides of the planet that did not know one another, and creating a system that essentially enabled these people to trust that something was true. And that really is at the core of like what Bitcoin is, because one of the big problems with trying to create a digital currency in the past is that people, essentially you always needed a third party. You needed like a PayPal or a central bank. And so this idea of two people being able to commerce between one another without a central party was really something that just never existed before. So today, for our next speaker, we're gonna have, it's a little bit more of a technical talk. It's about 10 minutes long. And just give me 1 second, I'm gonna pull up the presentation. And do we have Ethan? Is he nearby? There he is. Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, we'll have you up. Which one is it here?
That one.
This one?
Aptly named. Yeah.
Got it. Did you want to talk a little bit about the Byzantine, the Bitcoin and Redmobile business, or just so people have some context, or?
I'll give them context right away.
Cool.
Don't worry,
Okay,
I got
so you're all. Okay, so is that fine?
this. Yeah, that's great. This thing works?
Not for your PDF. Actually, if I.
Yeah,
Oh, it does work?
Yeah, it works fine. Sort of. I guess we'll see. Okay, it's a PDF, so there might be some issues. How many people know what Byzantine fault tolerance is? Cool. How many people are utterly horrified by the phrase? Okay, good. Huh? Do I need a mic? Am I loud enough? Yeah? Okay. I think I speak pretty loudly. Okay. This is for the recording. How's that? Okay. Yeah, so some of you are frightened. How many people here have been screwed over in the past because they were lied to? Surely the vast majority of you at one point or another. Better question. How many people here have succeeded in something despite being lied to? Right? You people are Byzantine fault tolerant. Okay. So I'm Ethan. I'm CTO at a company called Tendermint. We build Byzantine fault tolerant software. We'll tell you a little bit what that actually means. We'll get into this. I did a master's on this stuff at the University of Guelph because it was supposed to be on machine learning, but I had to pivot because I fell down this rabbit hole, and you'll see. Anyways, so the essential problem here is the problem of distributed state. You have something stateful, right? Whether it's your culture or your values or something in a computer system, there's some kind of state that you're interested in. And throughout a big chunk of history, I mean, the whole evolution of humanity has been one of how do we manage distributed state? If you look at like older tribes, they have these oral traditions where the knowledge of the community is spread across the elders and is communicated through rituals and things like this, right? As we moved into larger civilizations, we had kings at the top and priests and all this kind of stuff. Then come along the Greeks with this totally heretic idea that we could actually store the state in the citizens. The citizens could hold the body of law, and they could update it over time by coming together in a parliament and negotiating on the rules. There was this kind of consensus process, right, where they figured out what they wanted the state to look like moving forward. And they would come to an agreement on that. And in fact, in computer science, this problem of distributed state, you have some state, you want it to exist across many computers across a network, and you have to keep them all in sync while doing that. It's not helpful if I think one thing and another computer thinks another thing, right? That defeats the point of the distributed state. So we have this overwhelming problem, not just in computer science, in culture as well, of how to manage distributed state, how to achieve consensus across a network of individuals or computers, right? And so I'm going to give you a very brief history of distributed state, at least in the context of computer science. And I think I have to use this because, okay. So in the beginning, it essentially looked like this. It was the era of my computer, right? You had this guy, Bill Gates. He was the most popular man in the world, and he pretty much owned us all, and everyone had their own machine, and there was really no coordination between them. You had some local view of the state, and someone else had some local view of what the internet was like, and there was really no synchronization. We move forward from the era of my computer into the era of somebody else's computer, also known as the cloud. And today, so many of the things we do on computers are about accessing some external service, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Google, whatever. And all of those services need to be very highly available to many people all over the world. And to do that, they have to manage state and replicate that state on many machines, right? So they have a consensus problem. And in the history of computer science has been dealing with the consensus problem for decades, right? Originally in the late 70s, they had to figure this out because they wanted to use microcontrollers, processors, to run airplanes, right? And they needed multiple processors because if one of them failed, you can't have your airplane crashing. So they had a consensus protocol to do that, right? And even today, every major internet service you use, at the bottom of the stack, there's a consensus protocol that coordinates the machines, the computers that are managing all the critical data. Now, moving forward from the era of somebody else's computer or the cloud into the modern day, where we're talking about services that are really provisioned by our computers. Right now, we're talking about these peer-to-peer decentralized networks where anyone in the public can participate, whether in mining Bitcoin or serving files in BitTorrent and so on, right? And in this context, consensus is a lot more difficult because people will lie. There are malicious actors, right? So not only do we have a consensus problem where we need to keep machines, keep computers in sync despite some of those computers failing, we have a more general malicious consensus problem where not only do we need to keep computers in sync despite some of them failing, we need to keep them in sync despite some of them being explicitly malicious, some of them lying. Right? If you had a parliament and some of the legislators come in and are lying, they're telling some of the politicians one thing and some another thing, how does that parliament actually reach consensus? And so this problem is called the Byzantine generals problem. And this is where we get Byzantine fault tolerance, where Byzantine came from the idea that when the problem was originally invented in the early 80s by Leslie Lamport, he said, it's kind of like the issue of the Byzantine generals needing to coordinate to attack Rome, where one of the generals might be a traitor, right? He might have sold out to the Roman army and he's lying to the other generals that he's trying to coordinate with. So we get this idea of Byzantine fault tolerance. Now, a blockchain is really just a particular kind of solution to Byzantine fault tolerance. And the thing that made Bitcoin, the first blockchain, so interesting was it solved the problem of Byzantine fault tolerance. I'm just going to call it BFT from now on. It solved the problems of BFT using economics. It said, look, we can't stop malicious people, but we can make it expensive for them to be malicious, for them to lie. And so Bitcoin is a system that was designed to be incentive compatible, which means that the most profitable thing for someone to do was to cooperate with everyone else, right? You compare this to Wall Street. What's the most profitable thing for someone to do when they're working on Wall Street or our equivalent? But I won't talk about Bay Street because some of you might work there. But essentially, it's to lie, cheat, and steal, right? I mean, how many people on Wall Street have the individual's best interests at heart, right? Most of them are going at it trying to cheat people out of their money so they can make billions, right? And you can't blame them. That's the system they were born into, right? The profit-seeking motive is built into all of us. You can't blame a person for seeking profit. But you can talk about a system that's poorly designed because it encourages people to seek profit at the expense of others, right? But design is not a zero-sum game. It's not true that every system has to incur loss to other people. There are ways to build systems that are incentive compatible where the most profitable thing to do for you as an individual is something that's actually cooperative and beneficial to everyone. So the reason I think blockchains have been so successful is because they've emerged at the intersection of these three trends, each of which is, all hype and buzzwordy in in their own right. You have the cloud, this architectural decentralization, the fact that there are computers out there everywhere and you can access them anytime you want. You have the sharing economy, sort of political decentralization, and then there's cybersecurity. And each of these things have become so critical to our society, and the blockchain just emerges and cuts across all of them at once, where you have services that are distributed across the globe, where anyone can participate in this sort of sharing network. Anyone can be a Bitcoin miner and could help secure the network. Or maybe down the road we'll have a decentralized version of Uber where there isn't, some jerk-off CEO in charge. And then cybersecurity, of course, is absolutely critical today's day and age. All these hacks and all the nightmares with the election and stuff like this, right? So the blockchain emerges, cutting across all of these trends and really addressing each of them in a very comprehensive way. Okay, that's background, that's context. How many people are still scared of the term Byzantine fault tolerant? Okay. How many of you think you could explain it to someone else? Yeah, all right, confidence. Okay, Tendermint. So what does Tendermint do? Well, this is ultimately the problem, and I hope by now you can understand this statement. Byzantine fault tolerant state machine replication. It means we can take a state machine, something that has an internal state and updates it over time, replicate it on many computers, keep them in sync, even despite some of those computers being hacked. I mean, this is like pretty foundational stuff, right? And the technology is actually kind of old. It's just now there's actually all this motivation for it to be deployed because Bitcoin is really, giving the banks a run for their money. The thing that Tendermint does is it provides this kind of functionality for applications written in any programming language, which is really a breakthrough, because until now, if you wanted Byzantine fault tolerance, you had to use the programming language and the execution environment provided in the blockchain. Like to use Bitcoin, you have to use Bitcoin's silly scripting language for moving money around and doing time locks. It's a total nightmare for developers. Ethereum has its own programming language that is also horrible and riddled with safety issues. And it's great because you can compute anything, but it's horrible because there are all these edge cases that you have to think about. And all of a sudden, $60 million goes up in smoke. Oops. Right? So with Tendermint, you can actually build it in any programming language you want, programming language you're used to that you've been using for 20 years. Suddenly you can inherit all these amazing security features. How do we do that? Well, we have something called the Tendermint consensus algorithm. It looks like this. There's something called a polka because the people involved are doing something like the polka, right? There's like this coordination thing. I won't tell you too much about it. You can look it up online. Something called the Tendermint socket protocol. This is what makes it possible to use Tendermint from any programming language. Again, you can look it up online. What kind of applications can you build? Absolutely anything you want, including a scalable cryptocurrency. If you've been paying attention in the space, cryptocurrencies don't scale. We're proposing something called Cosmos that's built on top of Tendermint that does scale, allows you to interoperate across many different kinds of blockchains, many different cryptocurrencies. The libertarians can play, the anarchists can play, the bankers can play, and even your average citizen can play. That's it for me. More information at these wonderful websites. Thanks so much.
Okay, so for our next speaker, we have Bilal, and he'll be speaking about blockchain and banks. So Bilal, we'll have you come up here. Okay, so please help me welcome Bilal.
This one. Okay. Hi. So Sunny asked me to do a presentation about blockchain and banks, and I didn't know how to go about doing it, especially given that you were under strict NDAs and a whole bunch of lawyers had to approve. So anyways, I actually had to go about figuring out a way. Luckily, I found something on YouTube. There's this thing called, and I hate to do YouTube videos, but hey, here's an interesting one. Hopefully, maybe some of you have watched it already.
Indeed asking, then I am saying no.
Oh, come on. That's
It's
rigged.
unconstitutional. You can't make your own currency. That is the federal government's job. We simply cannot let you make big loans in eCoin that you wouldn't make in dollars.
Jack. Look at me. I am not the problem here. The problem here is hard cash is fading. rapidly. That's just the way of the world right now. And Bitcoin is spreading, and if Bitcoin takes over, we are all in a world of hell. It is unregulated, it's already reached its transaction volume maximum, and it is partly controlled by Chinese miners.
You just accepted $2 trillion from them.
Yes, yes. And now I want to use it against them. With eCoin, we control the ledger and the mining servers. We are the authority. I will make sure you have visibility into every single wallet that's open, every loan, every transaction, which means we can start making new assets, which means we can start rebuilding the banking sector without your having to inject even more politically unpalatable federal funds into it.
The president will laugh in my face.
But he'll know this is the right thing to do. This is going to be controlled by a good old-fashioned American company. You want to regulate it? Be my guest. Regulate the shit out of it. I'll give you back doors, side doors, trace it, whatever you want. Just don't shut it down.
Okay.
But if you are indeed, ask.
How do you go about it? Okay. Sunny. Anyways, just think about this video, and some of you may have sat down through a private session behind closed doors where a subtle version of exact same, kind of thing may have been pitched, or you may have been the person who would be pitching it. So I've seen both versions. But the biggest thing right now in the Bitcoin space is the question. This is the biggest question. When you're talking to a bank, the internal discussion is somewhere around whether we want to go with private blockchain and public blockchain. So how many people in the audience actually know what a private blockchain is? Okay. Public blockchains? Okay. And neither? Okay, there's a few. So let me tell you one thing. The biggest three words, which are, if you're a consultant, okay, if you're an overpaid consultant, working with a decision maker within one of these banks who actually have to advise them of what to do about this precise decision, public blockchain, private blockchain, a hybrid, neither. The three hardest words that you would ever have to utter from your mouth would be, I don't know. 2016, 2017, it's very profitable to be a Bitcoin consultant or a blockchain consultant, to be exact. But it's proportionally become harder to be honest, to be brutally honest, to tell people, and I debated the next slide, trust me. Trust me, this is hard. So I asked yesterday before I did this, because I know it's been recorded. So the question was, I asked Andreas, what's the best thing to do, Andreas? Said, deliver it and deliver it with a smile. Because he likes to be provocative anyways. Look, here's the thing. I try to think about it both in a positive and negative way. So what do banks really have today? Any guesses? Excellent. Trust and reputation. These are two things that banks have. Nobody can replace that. Good or bad, I don't know. But anyways, that's the way things are. Trust is a very interesting, important thing. It's built over a long period of time, and it can vanish overnight. That's a lesson that we should learn, at least from 2008. And there are other examples as well. Reputation. Banks care a lot about their reputation. Ask any executive, ask any director, ask any VP who had to stave off a sign-off just because it was not prudent to go through production for a thing that you don't know how it's going to perform and how it's going to act. So banks care about that reputation very much, which poses a bit of challenge, which is the bad side of the equation, perhaps. I don't know. But what do banks not have? What do they don't have? Any guesses? Okay, yeah, anyone else? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, But number one thing I would say with all the entrepreneurs in the room, I can tell you one thing guaranteed, and they realize this very much. I asked around people in the audience. There was quite a few bankers here. And you know what? We were there at 2013, 2012 timeframe. You know, that's when I started to attend these Bitcoin meetups, just so that I can have at least a little more informed opinion. And trust me, today there are far more bankers in the audience than there were in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. Banks, what they don't have, time. Time is exactly one of the things which is not readily available in this space. And when I want you to think about time, think about two things. Think about Titanic. You know, it took the person, the petty officer at the top of the Titanic deck. He could see the iceberg right ahead. He shouted at the top of his voice, yet it took quite a bit of time for Titanic captain to actually move the ship out of the iceberg's path. That's one time frame that you have to think of. You can draw the analogy yourself. Think of the second time frame, and I think that's one of the questions as well. It took Titanic 2.5 hours between the time it hit the iceberg and between the time it sank. Think about that. So where are we in that time scale? You know, my second slide, I don't know. That's a very close analogy. So I put this one because every single bank out there had got this innovation lab, or innovation center, which is doing something around blockchain technology. My question really is it possible to innovate while you're being regulated? You know, people are trying, and we should at least give them the credit for that. You know, we did nothing wrong. That's a quote from the CEO of Nokia. You know, from bankruptcy filing of Nokia, we would know that it took some executives 9 months within Nokia whether to build an in-house operating system or go with the Android open system. And we know the answer to that question. So time is an important commodity. I'd like to share a few stories, but I'm running out of time, but I'll share at least one. This is not a fair fight is a comment directly from one of the bankers who actually had to integrate a legacy system with a new system. And this is another question one of the bankers had to answer to executives, the decision makers, people who have allocated capital towards blockchain technology project the morning after the Dow attack. You know, these are tough times, to be honest. And, you know, one get to appreciate the complexity of these things. So my conclusion basically is it's up to us, the technical people, people who are actually driving technology. We have to bring technology people up to speed, and we have to bring decision makers. Whether you're working in a startup or you're working in a regulated industry, you know, there are knowledge gaps which have to be filled, and people have to help bring that gap. And it's up to the technical people to bring other people up to speed in terms of what's going on, at least in terms of technology. I thought about how to close this thing. And anyone read the book Too Big to Fail by Andrew Ross Sorkin? Okay, he covers a whole history about 2008 financial crisis. Surprisingly, the Bitcoin blockchain was started in January 3rd, 2009. Some very historical parallels to it. The book ends with the quote from Roosevelt, and it goes something, and I thought about it, how to relate to this one. So I related to all the decision makers, all the VCs, every single entrepreneur who are actually trying to work on technology and project. Many of them may not ever see the end of light of day, but think of that. And it's a quote that Roosevelt said about leadership under a republic. You know, it's not the critic that counts, not the man that points, but the strong man stumbled, or the doers of deeds could have done better. Credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with sweat, blood, and dust, who strives valiantly, errs and comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who strives to do the deeds in pursuit of a worthy cause. Think of that just for a second. You know, many people who are in this industry who are trying to implement projects, they may not ever come to fruition. But essentially, it's at the end of the day, the spirit which counts. So thank you very much.
Okay, so for our final speaker before we go to our panel, we've got Dawood Khan. He's going to be speaking about blockchain and enterprise. And so, Dawood, if you can come up here, that'd be great.
Excellent. Thank you. How many of you are still awake? It's way past my bedtime, so I don't know. But those were excellent, excellent presentations. Thank you very much to all the speakers. You really made my job a lot easier. You kind of set the stage for what I was going to talk about. And really, think for a moment, we live in our world of blockchain here, right? So I've been following blockchain for a bit now, and a lot of the people here I learned from every single one of these experiences, and I'm continuing to learn. And so we're looking at the world outside from within the blockchain, from the blockchain lens, right? This presentation is a little bit the other way around. It's from the world outside looking into the blockchain world, right? The people around us. And my focus isn't really just the financial sector, but really other verticals also that are enterprises. So my focus is really around the enterprise, and think of them as buyers of your solutions if you're startups in the future, and to discuss with you a little bit of where their mind's at, and to talk a little bit about an initiative we've kind of going off of what Bilal has talked about, trying to see if we can help these organizations adopt blockchain, because if they can understand it, they can sell it internally within the organization, they can adopt it, they'll buy your products. So what we're trying to do is get to the very front of that stumbling block from an enterprise organization perspective in terms of the buyer's journey. So think about that, all right? Who are we? We're management and technology consultants. Usually I use a lot of swear words, so disclaimer up front, please excuse me. It's past my bedtime, as I said, and sometimes I slip up. And so we went and reached out to some of our clients. Some of them are here, probably many more, and we asked them about what they thought about blockchain, what some of their challenges were, and we'll talk about it. Well, we all know we're at almost at the cusp, at the very top of the hype cycle, courtesy of Gartner here. You can see blockchain is way up there, and it's almost at the top of the hype cycle. So I wanted to see what I would get if I did this comparison on Google Trends. You can do it yourself. I did this in the summer, sitting by the pool there, and I had some time, so I just ran this, put in a spreadsheet like most consultants do, and made some money off of it, I guess. But I was surprised. You know what? I compared to the Internet of Things. Oh, that's just so yesterday, like the Internet of Things. Who talks about that anymore? Data analytics, cloud. This is just general chatter, interest on the Internet, searches, etc., news reports. Very interesting. So in talking to several executives, CIOs, CMOs, CEOs, CFOs, you name them, VPs, in established, regulated, typically regulated industries, both inside and many outside of the financial sectors. Quite honestly, they couldn't really answer our questions. To Bilal's point, they had more questions than answers. And to be quite honest, they would ask us, so what do you think? And we'd say, if I know, right? But what we wanted to understand is what their challenges were before they even think about adopting blockchain. So think about a buyer's journey. Think about a CMO or a CFO or a CDO, a digital officer in a retail or any of these places where you're trying to go and sell and pitch your solution. What's he or she thinking when you're from their perspective? What bridge do they need to cross before they can buy your product or your solution, before they can buy into blockchain, right? What do they need to do? What's their journey? We got to address that. If you don't address that, their life is so complex. They've got so many other things on the go, and this is just another nuance, right? So when we talked to them, they had a lot of challenges, like, you know, what is the impact of my business? Why would I do this? They don't buy this whole thing around disintermediation or, you know, or it's going to save costs, net. They look at how they're doing loyalty and payments and supply chain management today, and if they were going to do that in a disruptive way internally, they don't get that. They don't buy that. They maybe don't understand it. What they do get, though, is the disruptive threat. So they understand there could be a disruptive threat, and they could be disintermediated. I'll give you an idea. I was speaking to mayors and chairs a little while ago of different municipalities, right? And they never think they can be disrupted. So I told them, if you don't think you can be disrupted, just look at what Uber and Airbnb are going to do to your tax revenues, to your licensing fee revenues. And I guarantee you, they didn't say anything at that point, but I guarantee you some of those mayors and chairs of these municipalities started thinking, oh God, I better wake up and start looking at this. The challenge with blockchain is where the F do you start, right? Where do you start? It's complicated. There are different people. There are different camps. People have certain biases, you know. Ethereum is good. Bitcoin is the best. You know, then you hear about the DAO, etc. If you're not an expert in this space, it's difficult. And coming back to, again, from an organizational perspective, blockchain is truly transformative. And to this point in time, we've been talking about transformation. We do digital transformation all day long, right? There are three key things to that. People, could be your staff, employees, your customers, your end users. So if you're a bank, your retail bank customers or your wealth management customers, et cetera. The staff that deliver those services, the people who enable those services, et cetera. The business itself. That includes your partners, your supply chain, your ecosystem that you operate in, et cetera. Your processes, the policies, the governance, the legality around legal frameworks around that you have to comply with. And it goes on and on. And then the technology is right at the bottom. There is another very interesting thing that's happened with blockchain in addition to disruption of all of these three things, and that's kind of latent. It's in there, it's hidden. You know when, so I'm from the mobile industry, if you couldn't tell. When Apple came about and Google came about with the iPhone, they didn't just disrupt the user experience and gave you this fancy phone, they disrupted the business model. I had a 2-year-old son. I did my post-grad at Columbia, and it was where Spider-Man was filmed. So my son was like a big fan of Spider-Man. So I had a 2-year-old back then, and he said, "Dad, can you download the ringtone for Spider-Man for me?" Right? And it took me half an hour to find this ringtone and download it. Right? It took me forever. What Apple and these guys, they disrupted the business model, disrupted the user experience, et cetera, and that's what this is all about. So one of the key challenges organizations face right now with blockchain is they don't know where to start. If you're interviewing resources, okay, think about it. If you're a CIO and you're interviewing a resource that says, I have experience in blockchain, you don't know whether that's good or bad. There's no independent central authority, excuse me, that qualifies you to be an expert in blockchain, right? So what we're doing is, to Bilal's last point actually, is we're trying to establish, as part of the buyer's journey, a collaborative effort. And so you have this organization called blockchaincertification.org. Please go there. I'm running out of time, but it looks at 3 things. And it has 4 levels of certification. And the first level starts with business transformation, because one of the biggest challenges we have with people in blockchain space, they don't understand the whole aspect of digital transformation, design thinking, how do you do business cases, how do you justify it, how do you sell it up and down. What is blockchain from an enterprise perspective, applications from an enterprise perspective, not a consumer perspective, an enterprise perspective, and the smart contracts. We're looking for support, advisors, people who can help contribute to the courseware, people who can teach, partners, and people who would like to learn. Please contact me. We're working with one of the larger professional organizations in the world with tens of thousands of enterprise executive members to bring this to the market, and that they'll deal with, we'll have some CIOs and others as part of the advisory board. We'll have some university academia as part of the advisory board, but we need people from the blockchain community to be part of it. So please do reach out, please connect, and we won't be able to do this without your help and support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is this working? Hello? Okay, so for the last part, what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring up all the speakers on stage, and we're going to open it. We're going to have a quick discussion between them, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd so you guys can start thinking about questions you might have. So, Dawood, I'll ask you yourself and Bilal and Mariam and Ethan and everybody who spoke to come up to the stage, and then we're going to have Brian actually coordinate this discussion. Okay, so just give them one last big round of applause, and after this is done, we've purposefully kept half the pizza in the back, so we've got the other half coming out. We've got more samosas as well, so if you're hungry, you can grab some food.
Thank you very much, Sunny. Hey folks, my name is Brian, and I'm working on U.Cash and a part of the FinTech Canada team. And I'm here to chat to you about the evolution of blockchain. Well, actually, these guys are. I'm just going to ask some questions. But before I head into it, just a quick poll of the room. Addison before asked how many of you here were working on startups. About a third to half the room put their hands up. I'd actually like to throw out the question, show of hands, who's actually working on a blockchain project right now? So it's about the same amount. Show of hands, who is looking to, within the near future, spin up, or hop onto a blockchain project? Quite a number of people, and I'm assuming the rest of the people are here for pizza, samosas, and good conversation. Okay, folks, there's your audience. So the first question I had, I'm actually going to throw it to Bilal. We're here to chat about the evolution of blockchain, right? We've seen a new disruptive technology come before, which is the internet. So in your opinion, where are we in terms of the evolution of blockchain comparatively to the internet?
So remember my slide? I don't know. So I thought of that. So the question would be, I'll put it out to you. What do you mean? Where are we in terms of internet for whom would be one piece of the question. And then you can break it down that into a further clarified understanding of which geographic location you're talking about. But let's see, what did you mean by that question? That are you talking about business, or are you talking about individuals?
Well, I guess in this room is composed of both individuals and those that are in business, right? But let's throw out to the general population.
Sure. So general population, in my honest opinion, I think we're roughly around 1980. Okay, so literally we're that far off. If you're talking about banks, businesses, in some cases we could be 1997, 98. In some cases, so.
We're about to crash.
So that's your opinion, but yes, but correct. So yes, so there is actually a bunch of these cycles back and forth, and depending upon which geographic location, I'm sure there are different stories for different areas.
Terrific. Dawood, would you have any differing opinions for the not general population, but for the business side?
I totally disagree with what he says. You have to ask me, but no, I'm just joking. He has to be a consultant. Either that or he's met my grandmother, because he answers a question with a question, which is kind of interesting. From a business perspective, quite honestly, maybe in the financial sector or fintech, they are quite advanced, but the vast majority of the 99 point, I'll sound like Ali G, 99999% of the enterprise regulated industries, the large people who will spend a lot of the billions of dollars, they don't even know what, I'm talking about CIOs, and I'm talking about executives who are in decision making. They've heard of blockchain, but they're beyond a POC. If you get from a POC in a sandbox to a market trial where they touch the customer, oh my God, everything from all the questions you asked, will it scale? Is it secure? What could potentially go wrong? And they see the looming threat of disruption in some instances through fintechs and others, but the repercussions of failure are just way too high because some of these industries are regulated, some are based on customer trust and relationships, and they just don't want to F that up, right? So.
Gotcha. Good point. This question is actually for Addison. So Addison, your job is to keep people out of jail.
I don't pitch it as that.
So you're exposed to quite a, I guess, a profile of businesses and individuals that come to you. What are the most common questions and themes that people come to you and ask about?
Can I do that?
Yeah. Without going to jail.
Not going to jail or other penalties. Like most of it's civil stuff. Like I advise businesses, and in Ontario, most people aren't going to go to jail for almost anything you would do with your business. But there might be penalties, and if you have external investors or if you have any long-term plans for your business, you do want to follow laws.
Sure. Next one is actually for Ethan. Ethan, what areas do you see blockchain beginning to affect within the short term and within the longer term?
So, I mean, if you look around, you see all these different banks, especially, starting to experiment with this stuff. I think probably they're very scared that this technology is coming for them, the same way Uber came for the cabs and the internet came for the publishing industry. Basically, anytime you have an industry with artificial barriers to entry, you're going to be disrupted by technology, and there's pretty much nothing you can do about it other than accept it and try and be a leader in the innovative tech when it comes around. So it's starting with banks, but I mean, like, I think it's going to rapidly progress. I'm particularly interested in digital governance and in using this technology there. I think with the fallout of the election in the States and all these, populist uprisings around the world, there's a general discontent with the state of governance. People are thinking a lot more about their local communities. They want to be more involved in municipal levels. So I think there's a huge opportunity for this stuff on that front. Of course, it'll take a lot of time. So that's sort of like the more long-term, large-scale, how are we going to actually re-engineer society using this stuff? In the short term, we'll replace the SWIFT wire transfer system and you'll be able to move money for cheaper internationally. Whoop-de-doo. It's actually a big deal. I mean, bane of my existence is sending money, but yeah.
Gotcha. And Anastasia, so you're working on CryptoMed. So comparatively to a lot of projects that you see right now, fintech-based projects, you're going to see new types of projects that affect healthcare, that affect new industries beyond fintech. Talk to me about how you kind of craft your lens on how you view this project and how other people can bring unique approaches to use blockchain to come up with unique projects within the space.
Just to comment on that, one of the biggest questions that I feel I get a lot, and a lot of people get, is like, okay, so I understand how this technology works, sort of, but like, what can you do with it? And I think that's a really interesting question because we all hear about finance and we hear a lot about money transfers. And those are very important. And I believe there are also a lot of projects like CryptoMed that could be used. So for example, what we really do is we're just storing files in a secure way that's easy to access. You can store a driver license. You can use the same system for governance, like for example, if you want to ask for a birth certificate or something like that. I believe there are a lot of countries in the world, like Honduras, that are storing certificates for land ownership. So it expands in almost every industry that you can think of where there is a transfer of value. Because really at the end of the day, we just created a system that can cheaply and really securely enforce rules. And we can decide what those rules are. And a really good example was governance. And I believe actually Consensus is a blockchain company. They've built a system of governance called Boardroom, and it's open. Any one of you can download the code and use it today. And yeah, there are a lot of.
Great. And question for Mariam. We're at the stage now where we're beginning to explore, I guess, new blockchain projects. You're about decentralized brands. So what do you see as, what is necessary for a brand like Bitcoin or any new brands coming out to actually succeed into the future, decentralized brands?
One of the things with decentralized brands is it's hard to predict like how they'll shape up. It's almost like a seed in the wind, you know, it's shaped by different forces. So with Bitcoin, it sort of latched onto the privacy movement, even though it wasn't private, it's not anonymous, but it latched onto that. It also latched onto the fact that it was coming at the heels of the financial crisis. So the world was sort of ready for it. But one of the interesting things that has happened in the Bitcoin ecosystem is that, you know, you see a lot more use of the term blockchain. So there are divisions. One of the things with tech in general is that there is this massive graveyard of failed ideas. So there is a chance that Bitcoin, since it's the first, you know, we don't think about Netscape anymore. We think about Google when we think of search engines. So there is a chance that, you know, Bitcoin maybe does not survive. But it's also one of the things that has been difficult with Bitcoin is that it has had a really tough brand image in terms of, you know, being associated with criminality, and banks don't like that. So they sort of latched onto the idea of blockchain. And one of the things that made blockchain come into mainstream attention was, you know, Blythe Masters putting out that article saying blockchain changes everything. So now there is another problem that a lot of businesses latch onto the idea of blockchain, but they don't necessarily know whether or not they actually need it for their business or whether or not it actually works. And so one of the things that, you know, often people go up to venture capitalists and say, we're working on blockchain technology. Boom, you have $2 million. It's great. You know, so it works like that. So I think there needs to be a little more skepticism in whether or not your business needs blockchain. Does it need to be a public ledger? Does it need to be decentralized? That's one of the questions that businesses need to consider going forward. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'll add just one thing, and I can tell you this is based on some personal experiences. Majority of people in banks and general businesses as well, quasi-government agencies as well, this is a conversation with very technical people, CIO, CTOs, architects. There's a whole bunch of people who are now learning about it. And you know what? Bitcoin is a very interesting, or blockchain is a very interesting thing. You give up your knowledge very quickly by asking either a wrong question or making a wrong statement. It's generally, the most important thing in this space generally is to protect your reputation. Just like banks protected their reputation, individuals have to protect their reputation in terms of when you claim, hey, I know such and such, perhaps by the time you'll answer my 6th or 7th question, you'll probably give up, you know, where you are on that scale as well. And it's, you know, you talk about, I remember Michael Perklin, who did a certification program. That was a very seminal thing. That was a necessary thing because, you know, when you're talking to somebody, you have no idea where they are on that scale. And everybody seems to have at least an opinion about it, but they give up very quickly. A very quick example. You know, some place where I was doing a consulting, and they seem to have heard of Bitcoin quite a bit and blockchain. They were completely on board with blockchain. And, you know, one very simple question you can ask and see, because if they can explain a difference between a blockchain and a database, you know, that's a good starting point. That's number one. Then there's others as well. You know, you can bring up a very simple miner, you know, very, very simple primitive miner, which is an ASIC, and you run that and you ask just a very simple question. Can you please tell me where the reward is coming from? Or, you know, you open blockchain.info and then just ask a very simple quiz. And, you know, that's where people start to melt into certain places where, you know, where is this money coming from? And then that's where you can begin to have a very interesting, you don't need a certification program. That has definitely a value when you're hiring, but certainly when, you know, you're talking to decision makers, it's a much easier conversation, or at least people willing to acknowledge. And one thing which is kind of surprising, many executive decision makers are very open about acknowledging, hey, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. And that's a very big change.
Yeah, I would just say exactly, just extending beyond that, the challenge they're facing is, okay, I'm willing to learn, but I can't have my entire organization spend this time, and I need to scale my organization. I don't even know what questions to ask. So unfortunately, not all of them want to hire consultants like us forever, even though we'd love to. So they do need some way to kind of standardize, like, a common book of knowledge, a common understanding of knowledge, like certified management consultants have, like professional engineers have, other professions have, from an enterprise perspective, right? That they can say, this is enterprise grade knowledge.
Terrific. What's our timing like? Do we have time for 10 minutes for questions? Okay, great. Love to open the floor up to questions for our panelists here. If you want to raise your hand. Actually, if you want to step on up to the mic, we can actually get you up on there.
Anybody have a question? I think it goes back to Ethan. So somehow I feel we are putting too much trust when we say about encryption, right? So you talk about this consensus and agreement, right? You guys are doing.
Sorry, say that again?
So you talk about like your company is doing like some sort of consensus and agreement algorithms, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about like blockchain and the Bitcoin thing, right? We somehow assume we have some sort of like unbreakable layer of this encryption and security, right? But even if you like any like encryption or agreement algorithm, right? You have more than k number of nodes, right? For sure you can get the actual knowledge. So if this is like very, very much inherent problem, right? And we are somehow putting it under the rug. Wherever we talk about like Bitcoin and blockchain, I don't see people often like really bringing this thing into light.
Bringing which thing? The fact that at the end of the day, we're all just human and like we could collude to mess the system up?
Exactly.
Like electing Donald Trump, for instance?
Exactly, you're perfectly right.
Yeah.
But think.
Totally.
Like when we, so what do you think when we don't bring this thing into light, right? And we are building something on top of this thing like that's like very, very obvious, like this is going to happen someday, right?
Sure.
And think like if somebody hacks like Bank of America, right? It's just Bank of America. But if somebody has access to this like all this big centralized like Bitcoin thing, it's much worse than Bank of America, right?
Sure.
And I don't see this thing. Maybe you can tell me like if some people are looking into this thing.
Okay, so a few things. So when I'm talking to people who aren't familiar with the space, I'm usually trying to convince them how amazing Bitcoin is. When I'm talking to people that are already familiar, I'm usually trying to convince them how horrible Bitcoin is, right? So I totally agree with you. There are a huge host of issues that totally get glossed over because people are like, oh, it's infinitely secure, it can never be hacked, whatever. None of that really matters because of all these so-called side channel attacks and things on the periphery, right? And you're totally right. I think the most important thing here is that we need to take cues from evolution. And from the history of biological systems on the planet, which are arguably the most well-designed systems, because there was no one arrogant enough to step in and say, I'm going to design this thing perfectly and I'm going to get it right from the beginning. That's the problem with humans, is that we have so much arrogance that we think it's possible that a single human could be competent enough and could accumulate enough information to competently manage something as large as the United States of America. I mean, the idea of having a single president for a nation that big is totally ridiculous, right? Like, we need to completely dispense with that notion. So, and I mean, looking at evolution, it was kind of the same kind of thing. You just try out a bunch of things everywhere, and you let them sort of compete with each other over the available resources, and the strongest ones survive. And the thing that strikes me so much about evolution that I think is so beautiful about it is that it's not this Darwinian, only the strongest survive, survival of the fittest, like cutthroat world, like it's often envisioned to be in like grade 12 biology courses. When you actually look deeper, there's an enormous amount of cooperation. I mean, the history of evolution on the planet has really been one of symbiosis and cooperation rather than competition, but it's sort of like a cooperative competition, right? And so I think that's really the crux of capitalism, and how and why capitalism is supposed to work is because you're supposed to be able to try things out. You're supposed to be able to fail. And if you fail, it's not that big a deal. You get up and try again, right? And so I think the critical thing is to not have systems that are too big to fail, because if you have something that's too big to fail, you can't learn from your mistakes. You can't build alternatives that can get better. And so the thing that excites me most, and we're trying to build a public cryptocurrency, there are so many parameters to pick in the design of this thing. There's no chance in hell that we're going to get it right on the first go. And we shouldn't even try, because that's just utter arrogance. What we should do is try and build a technology that makes it as easy as possible to have alternatives, right? So something with minimal barriers to entry. So that if someone doesn't like this version, they can start another version, and those versions can compete in the open market. And yes, there are issues with fragmentation, and there's all this extra overhead if you have, compatibility issues, like the fact that there are multiple operating systems is a nightmare, but it also makes it possible for the space in general to evolve. So I think you're totally on point that there are huge issues with the ultimate security of these systems, and we might be putting too much faith in them, but we do need to move forward with the technology, and we need to have many versions of it that can sort of compete with each other in the open market. And if some of them fail, that's okay. We can pick up and try again.
Thank you.
I love Donald Trump. Seriously though, for this reason, I love him because he is emblematic more than anyone before of how irrelevant the role of president ought to be. There's no one on the planet who has the competence to be president of the United States of America. That's it. And Donald Trump is emblematic of that.
Thank you, Ethan. We have another question right here.
I just want to build up on the previous question, actually. But the idea that I think that everyone's touched on is trust and reputation to some sense. And I just want to ask generally, what can the Bitcoin and blockchain community do today to A, build trust, but also get great acceptance and get it out of the development phase into more the day-to-day use phase, essentially?
So one of the things that is interesting about how the idea of blockchain, Bitcoin has spread, it doesn't advertise. Nobody's going to advertise out there and say, buy Bitcoin, get into the blockchain ecosystem. Nobody's going to come up to you and say that, except for your friends. So your social network is a very important point that lets you access this ecosystem. Lots of people that I speak to, they talk about what was their first point of contact. So the way Malcolm Gladwell put it, ideas, they spread like viruses. And that is how this idea has been spreading, and it keeps on spreading, because a lot of people get into this ecosystem because one of their friends becomes an advocate for it, some person that they know is interested in it, and so they learn of it through their social network. And so in terms of how it would become more mainstream, in a way, when you think about it, blockchain, the fact that, so when I used to go to meetups in 2014, and I used to know like Bilal from there, and a couple of people from there, and Anthony Deloria was doing those at Decentral, there used to be about 6 or 7 people maximum. There would be just like 6 or 7 people in a tiny room. We would sit on the floor. I would sit on the stairs. There would be more interesting people, less Oxford shoes, less business suits. So it was a far more libertarian, more anarchist. Those people have sort of drifted away. Like they're not coming to meetups. And so it is interesting to see how at that point, there was one person who came to the meetup. He was absolutely high. And he was talking, it was the most incredible speech that I've ever heard. But it was amazing because, it used to be 6, 7, 8, 10 people. And now look at you, you're 500 people sitting here on a Thursday night. And maybe some of you are here for the food, but, most of you are here to talk about blockchain. And how many people came here because somebody advertised it to you? So the way that this thing is going to spread is probably going to be, one of the things is there are legitimate sources. Think about the fact that Andreas Antonopoulos in 2013 or 2012 did not have that little sticker on Twitter that said verified account. There are people in the ecosystem now who have these social media profiles, like Gavin Andreessen, and you have, who else? Yeah, like Mike Hearn. These people are individuals who were there, who just sort of latched onto Bitcoin initially. And some of them have said that Bitcoin is a failed project. But the fact that they have legitimacy in terms of Twitter acknowledging them as public figures, you have to think about that and how it becomes a more legitimate discourse.